All right, guys. Just for shits and giggles, I want to break down the 4 parts of the emotional freedom technique integration grid, just for clarification, because I think that it's helpful and I think that it's going to be really, I think it's just ideal for everybody to have just a little bit of more of a clarification and solidification about what we're trying to do within these 4 different parts of where to use the emotional freedom technique or how to use the emotional freedom technique, because there's so many different things that you can do with this technique. And if you can function in each one of these spaces, these 4 spaces, effectively, then you'll be able to do most of that, quite a bit of that. So, breaking it down one by one is the identification square or segment, and then the venting segment, and then the nurture segment, and then the reprogramming segment. So, in identification, you are simply naming what you are feeling, observing what you are feeling, bringing curiosity to what your experience is. This is where you're saying, okay, I am experiencing anger, I am experiencing resentment, I am experiencing fear, I am experiencing XYZ. And simply noticing where that is, how that shows up, what that feels like in your body. If it is even contained within your body, and ideally developing a deeper connection with that. Now, in developing a deeper connection with that, this is where you're beginning to get into a little bit of parts work as well. But I mean, basically, just the identification, just being able to name what you are seeing, that in of itself, if you're doing that while you're tapping, that has the capacity to immediately begin to integrate you and to begin to reduce the intensity of the things that you're experiencing. Okay, so in the second phase, this is where you're getting into venting and expression, where you have identified your anger, you've identified your fear, you've identified whatever, the feelings that you are experiencing, and now you're beginning to speak from those pieces or those places. This is where you're saying, you know what, I'm angry because blah 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 blah. Like, imagine that you're just talking to a friend and you are like venting and off gassing and just saying, hey, like, this is what I'm upset about and I just need to get it off of my chest. And when you're done with that, you feel a lot calmer, you feel a lot lighter. You've been able to actually express from these places that needed to be expressed and to feel witnessed and spoken and validated. But you are actually validating yourself while you're doing it. And then the third square or the third segment is the nurturing aspect. And this is where you're beginning to intentionally cultivate positive, nurturing, emotional thought forms, typically that involve forgiveness or love or understanding or empathy or care, or kindness, gratitude, appreciation, and so forth. And a little bit later, I'm going to give you guys some linguistic techniques or a set of linguistic keys that can help further that. But I mean, basically, at this point, you're playing with your newly developed love muscle that we've been solidifying with the Ho'oponopono and beginning to self-direct positive, loving thought forms to the various aspects of ourselves that we've identified and vented from. And then lastly is the fourth square / segment, which is reprogramming or repurposing, repatterning. And in this last square or segment, you are creating new possibilities. You are instantiating new patterns of thought. You are looking at the ideal situation. You are moving in the direction of where you want to be, who you want to be, what you want to do, idealizing the best outcome or best case scenario, or adversely, you're looking back at things that happened previously in your life and you're able to do so from an elevated perspective. You now have wisdom, you now have insight, you now have understanding. You might even have closure in places that used to be of the sources of pain. And now you can look back at this thing and be like, I understand this. And now this is the wisdom that I've gained from it. This is why it's okay. This is why I'm okay now. This is why I'm better for that. And that no longer hurts anymore. And now I am a more complete and stronger version of myself, thank God. So those are all examples of repatterning and reprogramming, and there's definitely a much larger and longer conversation that is going to be addressed in the final week of this program. But one of the reasons why I want to point this out is because we're doing a little bit of a weaving thing throughout the course, where I'll say, hey, and this is this is what we want to talk about, or this is something that I want to bring our attention to back in the observation, and then venting, and then nurturing and reprogramming and going back and forth. And that kind of is indicative of the way in which that can show up while you're using the emotional freedom technique. And what I mean by that is you will go back and forth, or you can go back and forth between those stages in a way that is organic and intuitive and doesn't necessarily need to make sense. You can pendulate back and forth between venting and nurturing, because after venting for so long, you're starting to get riled up, and it's like, okay, hold on a second, now I'm gonna intentionally go into the nurturing phase so I can actually settle myself a little bit before I just get super triggered and shut down. Or another example is in the repatterning or reprogramming segments, and you're thinking about where you want to go and what you want to do, but all of a sudden, I'm noticing that fear is coming up right now, which means that you are now identifying new aspects which can be taken through that entire grid. So simply learning and getting comfortable with spending time individually in the segments is one of the things that I want to make sure that you can do by the end of this, but having an idea of how they can and do work together is incredibly helpful. So that is a little bit more of a thorough explanation of the integration grid with the emotional freedom technique. Coming up on 7 minutes, so that's gonna do it for now. Blam.